what makes a good dungeon? I don't know. At least that's what I would have said 2 weeks ago. After tons of research into TTRPG game design, we've put together our very first dungeon crawl in Therenor, and got 5 groups of adventurers, from our Discord server to playtest it for us. I'd like to take a moment to thank those brave souls for delving headfirst into our dungeon, and the fantastic dungeon masters who took the time out of their day to prepare and run this adventure. You guys are the best. Today, we're going to introduce our creation, review how our testers did, and share some of the most important tips we've learned about building a memorable dungeon. Then, we'll share the finished dungeon with you, so you could try it out for yourself. If you're new to the channel, greetings! My name is KrazyK, and this is Therenor, a vast and primordial world where giants roam. That absolutely stunning intro animation you just saw was made by Lee, the channel's artist and the other half of Therenor. Not only is this our first video of the new year, but it's our first video since Therenor's 1-year anniversary, and we wanted to start it off right with some brand new changes to the channel. Maybe you've noticed the new logo, maybe you haven't. I think it's pretty neat. There's also plenty of other new things we'll talk about later on. If you're interested in delving deeper into the realm, talking about world building, and participating in future Therenor events, join us on Discord. We have a thriving community of artists, world builders, and tabletop enjoyers who love to share tips and tricks. As a matter of fact, if you weren't able to make it to the first dungeon crawl, we're having a second one on the 31st of January, so make sure you're there. It's important to note that this video does contain spoilers for content within the dungeon. You may want to skip some parts if you're looking to experience this blind for the first time at the table. If you're interested in signing up, a link to the Discord will be in the description below. Before we introduce the dungeons we created, I want to take a moment to review what I believe to be 5 crucial concepts many great dungeons seem to utilize. And those 5 concepts are variability and exploration, invoking the senses, prioritizing player agency, interconnectedness between elements in a dungeon, and finally, challenging player morals. This, of course, is by no means a strict guideline you have to follow. It's just what I've noticed during my experience researching dungeons and module writing, and what I tried to adhere to as I built my first dungeon. The first is variability and exploration, which is a longer way of saying going through the dungeon in a bunch of different unique ways. You may have heard of the term J-Quazing. It's a term used to describe the highly customizable, non-linear dungeon crafting style of the late Janelle J-Quaze. Her work has completely changed the landscape of tabletop gaming, providing dungeon masters with the guidelines to tell much more personalized stories at the table. A dungeon that uses J-Quazian principles might include multiple entrances, looping rooms, hidden passages, or shifts in elevation that offer your players variation in how they choose to explore. A dozen groups can run the exact same dungeon, and each one will have an entirely unique adventure because of J-Quazing. The second is invoking the senses. Developing an atmosphere through description in your dungeon helps to immerse your players and prime them for role-playing. The room isn't just a 15 by 40 rectangle with stone walls. It's a damp, echoing corridor shrouded in oppressive darkness, the pungent odor of mildew seeping from its weathered cobblestone floors. Making your players really feel like they're in the dungeon will encourage them to react accordingly. Stimulating the 5 senses is also a great way to cue your players into possible secrets stashed throughout the dungeon. The sticky pull of thread-covered floors might warn dungeon goers of giant spiders up ahead, or the intense smell of decay in an otherwise empty room might hint at a deadly hidden trap. A little flavor goes a very long way to make a dungeon feel alive. Our third and possibly most talked about one is prioritizing player agency. Player agency is what separates a TTRPG from, say, reading a book or watching a movie. D&D only works when the players are given the freedom to interact with the world in the way they see fit, and the Dungeon Master fairly officiates how the world would interact back. A good dungeon provides the players ample opportunity to change their trajectory in the adventure. Here's an example of what not to do. A group of players might decide to stealth through a room of owlbears instead of fight them. One player could wild shape into a spider and crawl along the wall. Another might skin an owlbear from a previous room and use it as a disguise, and the third might just ask to roll a stealth check. Regardless of their method, all 3 players still roll the same stealth check, and all 3 players are immediately spotted by the owlbears. Since sneaking wasn't an option listed in the module, they failed it. There seems to be a misconception that a one-shot or a dungeon crawl needs to be on the rails, to effectively work due to its shortened time frame, and some dungeon masters limit or outright ban actions which feel too out of the box for the original one-shot's intentions. Even in these single-session games, the actions of the players could and should affect the world around them. Player agency doesn't always favor the players either. A party choosing to ignore the dungeon entirely and instead dig a tunnel directly under it realistically wouldn't be able to do so. But instead of removing their player agency and just telling them that they can't, introduce a consequence of some kind. Maybe monsters from another room overhear the commotion and set up an ambush for them. The players don't get the outcome they desired, but their actions still had an effect on the dungeon around them and changed how their story goes. The fourth concept is interconnectedness between elements in a dungeon. Oftentimes, and especially so in first edition dungeons, they can begin to feel a bit too linear. Travel through these rooms and get to the one single objective at the end of the dungeon, which is either slaying a monster, finding an artifact, or getting a bunch of treasure. To help establish some variation, consider adding numerous elements to your dungeon which can be interacted with beyond just slaying, like denizens within the dungeon, unique environments, or even other explorers who just so happen to be in the dungeon at the same time you are. These interactions should coincide with the overarching theme of the dungeon and help push players further along their quest should they take the time to engage with them. An excellent example could be found in the Lost Caverns of Sasquatch. The overall purpose of the dungeon is to delve into the lair of Igwilv the Witch Queen in search of innumerable treasures. Early into the Lesser Caverns, 8 creatures called Petch can be found digging a tunnel, the walls carved with depictions of Dao, Zorn, and other creatures from the elemental plane of Earth. The Petch warn the players of hazards and are even willing to restore petrified creatures if the party gives them gems. While this on its own is a good example of non-combat interaction in a dungeon, the Petch can also be used to free a Marid named Khazduol much further in the Lesser Caverns. Should the players free the Marid, she casts numerous spells to help the party find treasure throughout the dungeon. Different connected subplots interspersed throughout your dungeon crawl makes your dungeon feel like a real, breathing piece of your world, and provides many more moments of satisfaction for your adventurers. Players won't just talk about slaying the goblin boss at the end of the dungeon and getting all that loot. They'll reminisce about the folks they've interacted with throughout the rest of the adventure. The final aspect I consider crucial to a dungeon is challenging the player's morals. A dungeon crawl where each encounter is blatantly, purely evil can quickly get boring, and the scope of player choices shrinks considerably when the most logical, straightforward, morally sound answer is to just slaughter everything without a second thought. Any good dungeon should have 1 or 2 moments where players are required to really grapple with the ethics of their situation and commit one way or another as a group. Perhaps the party is hired by a baron to defend one of his towns against an oncoming horde of undead. Mere days before the undead are upon them, they're contacted by a rival noble, who'll pay double if the party sabotages the defenses they helped set up and let the town fall. Tempting the party with promises of greater rewards can lead to a deep group discussion and excellent role-playing moments. The decisions can create memorable, lasting impacts both in and out of the dungeon as word of their choices spread to the common folk. The party might receive more charity work as their deeds become known, or more morally reprehensible gigs should they frequently prioritize their own benefits. Like I said before, not every dungeon needs to hit all 5 or even any of these points to be considered good. Aspect number 5, challenging player morals, might not have a home in your campaign if it's a much more lighthearted setting, for instance. This is just, in my opinion, what I believe results in a memorable and replayable interactive adventure for the players. So what is Therenor's first dungeon even about? Tensions arise from the depths of the realm's mountains. Following the sudden crowning of Sturgis Amberguard as Therenor's newest Orfather, the King of the Dwarves, concerns over his legitimacy spread across the realm like wildfire. The chief advisor of the previous king, Amberguard's lineage was always shrouded in mystery. However, now that he sits upon the throne, gossip only serves to further polarize the dwarven people, who value tradition and history above all else. Among the Sea of Fables is one rumor Amberguard would pay anything to validate. Word is spread through poachers, mercenaries, and adventurers' guilds of devastating shifts in the ice beyond the mountains. The sundered land has re-exposed the buried ruins of ancient settlements once lost to snow and time. One such crevasse, the Chasm of Kraggarum, is said to hold the ruins of an ancient settlement Sturgis may be connected to. You and your group of adventurers have been contracted by the Orfather himself to find proof of his ancestral line and ease the doubts of his people. You will summit Therenor's northern mountains, find the Chasm of Kraggarum, and delve into its icy depths. Should you succeed in finding those rumored relics, the King of Dwarves will ensure you never spend another day hungry. If you fail, money will be the least of your problems. We are officially entering spoiler territory. If you're a future player in Kraggarum, skip ahead here, lest you ruin the fun for both yourself and your party. Now that our official warning has been given, let us begin. The Chasm of Kraggarum is a level 7 dungeon designed for 4 to 6 players, where adventurers are tasked with exploring the ruins of Kraggarum in search of dwarven relics. Of course, they're not the only ones down there. Wild beasts, vicious monsters, and sickening horrors from Kraggarum's past still haunt the chasm, which has also been claimed by Bjunndof, an elder bull frost giant with an infamous mean streak. The Chasm of Kraggarum features 2 parts, the exterior and the interior, with a total of 12 rooms to explore. While the goal of the dungeon is simple and straightforward, there are multiple subplots that can help or hinder a party's progress, and there is no standard way to run through the dungeon. It might be helpful to look on with your own copy of Kraggarum as we discuss each room. That's why I want to take a quick moment to introduce our brand new Patreon, which you can sign up to for free and receive updates on Therenor's progress, as well as direct links to downloadable content we've made for the realm, such as custom races, subclasses, and yes, even the Kraggarum module we're about to take a look at. There's some really cool stuff in there, so I hope you can check it out. The adventure begins as the players complete their multi-week voyage to the chasm. Your characters would likely have had time to adjust to and learn about one another over the weeks, and it's encouraged that a DM allows each party member to introduce their character. Once this is complete, the party faces the chasm itself, a massive scar on an otherwise pristine, icy landscape. There are 3 locations here, each a potential entryway into the dungeon. L1 are the Svelgol nests. Svelgols are large, scavenging birds which rear their young on the sheer cliff faces. The birds are wholly uninterested in the party, though players can coax them with food and use an animal handling check to descend into the chasm. Those less patient may decide to simply leap onto a passing bird, grappling it and tumbling down into the chasm, or even cast any number of spells for a safer descent, like Featherfall or Fly. Whichever method is used, this area leads the party to L4. A perception check in this area could also reveal the chasm to be about 250 feet deep, a deadly leap should a player decide to just jump in. It also reveals small objects that glint within the nests of the birds. Players can spend time looting these nests for some trinkets they could sell, as well as a twisted silver key. L2 is the remnants of a poacher camp. Players can search the camp for supplies, finding climbing gear they could set up in L1, as well as lockboxes which contain personal items and a written contract. The contract's between Lawnray Pikearm, who is an exotic game hunter, and a noble named Sumar Giedelstrom. Sumar hired Lawnray and her crew to collect a set of frost giant tusks and some blubber for a massive 6,500 gold sum. At the edge of the crevasse are 2 hiking bags and the corpses of 2 poachers who have died from an accident. They can be retrieved and their gear can be used to descend here into L5. On each of the corpses is a frozen potion of greater healing. In one of their bags is also a field journal titled Bazigal's Book of Behemoths, Volume 3, which can offer the players insight into the behavior of frost giants. L3 are flocks of gorge hoppers, which burrow beneath the snow and hide from the party should they get too close. Following one of these birds beneath the snow leads the players through winding icy tunnels that empty out into L6. With the exterior covered, let's take a deeper look inside the chasm itself. Once in Kraggarum, there are a few important things to note about the environment. For starters, the ambience. Protected from the bone-chilling winds of the surface, the chasms are warmer but still well below freezing. The air is crisp and dry, smelling faintly of guano, and the throaty barks of gorge hoppers echo throughout the chambers. Sounds within the cavern are amplified, the glacier occasionally creaking with a thunderous boom as its walls subtly shift against one another. Within the cavern, ceilings are 20 feet high in corridors and 30 feet high in chambers, unless otherwise specified. The ground is also difficult to traverse, covered in ice. Players are able to use their standard movement, however taking the dash action or bonus action requires a DC 14 dexterity saving throw where they lose their footing, using their action but cancelling the dash. Additionally, the caverns are unlit. Area descriptions assume the characters have a light source or other means of seeing in the dark. Also roaming the chasm is Bjunndof, an elder bull frost giant who's an avid collector of ancient dwarven artifacts. He spent decades studying Therenor's early dwarves, and the recent opening of the crevasse has revealed the strongest source of his favorite relics. Like most frost giants in Therenor, Bjunndof has a gifted mind, but instinct forces him into a fierce rage when confronted by something he perceives as a threat to him or his horde. The moment the party enters, the DM should roll a 1d8 to determine which of the other 8 rooms Bjunndof starts in. Each time the party moves to a new chamber, Bjunndof also moves, a direction which can be determined by the DM or left up to chance with the Bjunndof movement table. Players will hear Bjunndof muttering to himself, his thunderous footfall echoing through the chasms if they move into a room adjacent to him. Should the players enter the same chamber as the giant, or the giant and the players are heading into one another's chambers, they must succeed on a group stealth check or be detected. Monsters will also hide in rooms Bjunndof enters, having quickly learned angering the giant leads to a brutal death. Bjunndof is very cautious of small folk this far north in Therenor. Those who usually do venture beyond the mountains have poor intentions, and the giant would state as such. If members of the party draw their weapons or imply they're here to collect relics in any way, Bjunndof would react with violence and attack until the party flees to another room. Should the players simply express their interest in the history of Kraggarum, however, Bjunndof might be more interested in sharing what he's learned, inviting the players elsewhere, such as L12, Bjunndof's study. The players are unlikely to best Bjunndof on their own. A confrontation could quickly turn deadly. It's important as a dungeon master to emphasize that running is always an option. If the players anger Bjunndof and have nowhere to run, they can halt his rage by yielding during their fight and surrendering a magic item, as described in the Book of Behemoths. If the players don't have this book, they can attempt a nature, arcana, or history check to recall how frost giant combat rituals can be ended preemptively. Should the players pacify Bjunndof in this way, they could get the opportunity to possibly ask him a question about the dungeon. The giant has spent multiple months in Kraggarum and can provide general information about the denizens of each cavern. Players may also ask about Sturgis Amberguard, which Bjunndof may share some not-so-pleasant news that there is no revealed link between Kraggarum and the Dwarf King. Bjunndof is willing to answer one question each time he's pacified in this way. As the players travel to the next room, he'll remain in this one before he begins his random movement once more. Should they run into Bjunndof a second time, he will once again be cautious of the party. There are 9 total rooms in the interior of the chasm. L4 are the gorge hopper dens, where dozens of these flightless birds seek refuge from the frigid surface winds. Players could search for the ruins in the corner and discover a small crack within the ice, which partially reveals L8, a chamber over, as well as a single hidden dwarven relic. The southernmost part of this chamber also has a tunnel too large for a size-huge creature to squeeze through, perfect for hiding from Bjunndof if the players are discovered here. L5 is the mountain goblin camp. In this room, 4 mountain goblins are loudly arguing over who has the strongest headbutt. There aren't many valuables in this room, anything noteworthy already broken and gnawed to pieces. If the goblins are made aware of the party, they ask the adventurers to inspect the cracks in the ice wall that they've been making with their heads to settle a feud of theirs. Investigating the wall reveals all these cracks are nearly identical to one another, though the goblins seem to believe there is a difference and one of them is definitely the strongest. The players must choose between one of 4 goblins. The first is a grizzled, dusty white goblin, whose skull roof is scarred from past fractures. The second is a boisterous grey goblin, who flexes obnoxiously at the party. The third is a seething, dusk-colored goblin, whose glare could stop a hill giant in its tracks. And the fourth is a scraggly, yellow-white goblin, who energetically hops around and is missing most of its teeth. Claiming the goblins are all equal in strength angers them and they attack. However, choosing one of the four will end their argument, and the goblin the party chose will introduce themselves as Ubok, insisting they now owe the party a favor. Ubok can be used to distract Bjunndof one time in any room, allowing the players to automatically succeed on their stealth check. Ubok will then flee, Bjunndof chasing close behind them. L6 is the Frigid Corridor. This thin hallway is 70 feet tall, and the first 10 feet of each wall is pocked with chiseled holes. Occasionally, a gorge hopper squeezes through, moving south to L4. Unbeknownst to the party, 8 pale blue cave goblins hide 50 feet above the floor, visible only with a high passive perception or a successful perception check. The goblins wait, spears ready, until the party passes by separated, injured, or they activate one of the traps in the halls north leading up to L11. The goblins then ambush the adventurers. If the goblins are discovered, they'll try and play off the fact that they were lying in wait to ambush you. Should the party threaten or continue to push them, the goblins might even reveal the presence of the traps leading to L11, or mention ominous wailing that they've been hearing from L10. Slaying these goblins rewards the party with a ring of warmth and a fashionable fur cloak. L7 is the poacher camp. Here the remaining members of Pikearm's exotic hunts, Lonray Pikearm, a female dwarf, Gerard Dursey, a male human, and Paukel, a female Hesthog, discuss how they plan to free their friend Tycho Wonderswitch, a male gnome from L8. The party can either talk to or ambush the poachers, who will surrender and offer their supplies if a fight seems imminent. They will also ask the players to help free their friend. If they agree to the quest and do so, Pikearm will share her contract with the players if they don't know of it already, and offer to split the bounty if they help slay Bjunndof together. If the party declines, they pack their belongings to leave. The supplies you can receive from the poachers are 5 greater potions of healing, a scroll of fly, and 2 potions of cold resistance. L8 is the Fallen Frost Giant Cavern. A frost giant has fallen here some weeks prior, and now 6 Iceborn guard its belongings. Tycho Wonderswitch, the gnome from L7, is held hostage in a cage, his enchanted eye causing the Iceborn to see him as a magic item. The players can stealthily free Tycho or slay the Iceborn and rescue him. The players might even decide to trade artifacts and gear with the Iceborn in exchange for the gnome. Should Tycho die in combat, the party can harvest his eye and transplant it onto one of themselves with a high medicine check. On a success, that player gains the ability to sense the presence of magic up to 15 feet away. Should this medicine check fail, they take 6d4 piercing damage and lose sight in their eye. The frost giant corpse in the corner of the room is in poor shape, but it still has a single impressive tusk worth 1,200 gold. The corpse is, however, booby-trapped, and will spray a caustic bile at any player who attempts to remove the tusk. Once this trap is activated, the raspy cackles of a vile old woman can be heard echoing from the corpse's mouth. This frost giant's hoard includes 4 dwarven relics, a mithril half-plate, and a cracked wand of Speak with Dead with 1d4+1 charges. L9 is the Frozen Cove. Unlike the other rooms in this dungeon, the Frozen Cove descends 30 feet downwards, and the sound of flowing water can be heard muffled behind the translucent ice on the rightmost side of the chamber. Tall, reflective stacks of ice are scattered throughout the room, and players with a high passive perception or succeed on a perception check can notice the shadows of 3 creatures circling on the other side of the wall. If the players don't notice the shadows, or do and fail to hide themselves, the wall will shatter, flooding the chamber with 20 feet of ice water. 3 hammer seals will enter the chamber, attacking on initiative count 15 and targeting any players currently swimming. If no players in the water, they'll attempt to push someone in with waves and attack them once they enter. If the players slay the hammer seals, A successful survival check can net you 3 pristine hammer seal pelts worth 200 gold each. L10 is the cemetery. The air in this room reeks of death, and the remains of the town's burial sites have settled uneasily here. While the corpses are immaculately preserved by the ice, some are missing, their coffins defaced with sickening symbols. If the party disturbs any of the coffins in this area or attempts to loot the corpses, 3 dwarf ghosts will manifest and surprise the party. They wail about being denied their eternal rest, attacking the party and only disappearing if the players leave the chambers or slay them. Players can use the Wand of Speak with Dead to talk to some of the other corpses in this room, who laments how their fellow companions have been denied eternal rest by a wicked hag. Players can soothe the spirits here with a Dispel magic spell, or they could find and return the stolen corpses of these 3 ghosts, which are located somewhere in L11. After doing so, the room is free to loot. In this room, the 15 coffins each contain a dwarven burial pendant worth about 40 gold each. L11 is the ruins of Kraggarum. Crusty linens, whalebone fetishes, and tanned leather ornaments of questionable origin dangle from the ceilings, walls, and roofs of the cave. The cavern itself reeks of rotting seal meat, and the air hangs stagnant, the acrid cove bringing on a sudden, light-headed tiredness and palpable misery. Kraggarum's centerpiece, a long, eroded tavern, stands shakily among the ruins, covered in oxidized red-brown symbols. 3 frowning snowmen stand watch at the front entrance, which is sealed with an ornate silver padlock. This cave is home to a winter hag named Rotten Ruth Rimebone, who has tormented the people of Kraggarum for centuries. Once the last remaining members of the town have perished, she remained, turning the ruins into her sanctuary and feeding off the residual misery for years to come. The 2 southern passageways leading into this room are booby-trapped by the hag, with jarred screams, iron pots filled with the piercing wails of Ruth's past victims. Triggering the traps deals thunder damage to all creatures in a 10-foot radius while also potentially deafening them for an hour. When players enter the cavern, Ruth is busy butchering a hammer seal in the basement. She's not aware of the party. A player could pick the lock to Ruth's home, use the key they found in L1, or simply knock to gain entry. Ruth is friendly to the players when they first meet, regardless of whether they knocked or broke in, and offers them refreshments which she will begin to prepare if at least one party member says yes. Ruth laments about how lonely it's been in the chasm with no one to talk to, and she mentions offhand that she's recently found a flyer for Lonray Pikearm's hunting company. She says she would love to pick her brain and learn about the life of an exotic hunter if she had the opportunity. Ruth then asks the party to bring Lonray to her in exchange for the frost giant tusk she retrieved from L8. To sweeten the deal, she also offers to help the party with sneaking past Bjunndof's watchful eyes. If the players bring Lonray back to Ruth, she'll give them the frost giant tusk, as well as cast a hex on Bjunndof, rendering him blind. Should the party decline, Ruth will be disappointed, offering them parting ale and pastries before she asks them to leave. Any players that eat the food must make a con save or become poisoned, an illusion subsiding and revealing the food to be fouled blood and rotten hammer seal meat. If the players decline to retrieve Lonray and leave the tavern, or the party becomes hostile to Ruth in any way, the 3 snowmen out front will animate into snow mulacrums and attack. On the second turn of combat, Ruth will fly out of the tavern chimney on a broom of flying, casting spells and raining terror from above. Once Ruth and the snow mulacrums are slain, a successful perception check can reveal that there's a corpse stuffed in each construct, each one wearing a dwarven burial pendant. The players can return these corpses to the cemetery in L10 to release the spirits and freely loot the graves there. Once Ruth has been slain, the party can loot the frost giant tusk, the broom of flying, and the plate she tried serving you pastries on, called a platter of deception. Any object placed onto it gets disguised as a delicious-looking pastry or mug of frothy ale. Finally, L12 is Bjunndof's study. Bjunndof carries with him an impressive collection of relics and tomes, and the players can search the bookshelves here for a passage on Ruth Rimebone, the Hag of Kraggarum. A player can take one of the 20 relics from Bjunndof's shelves, However, the giant has had his hoard memorized. Should he return and discover anything missing, he will fly into an inconsolable rage until the stolen items are put back. Players who search Bjunndof's desk will find a whaleskin field journal documenting his findings on the history of Kraggarum. Through his studies, Bjunndof believes Kraggarum used to belong to a clan called Ramcrest, which might be upsetting news to a certain king back home. If Bjunndof and the party are on friendly terms, he may escort them to L12 to show off his collection and further discuss dwarven history. During this talk, he will mention how he desperately desires Ruth's Broom of Flying, which he considers to be a priceless Kraggarum artifact. Should the party retrieve the broom for Bjunndof, he'll trade it for 5 of his dwarven relics. Afterwards, he will quickly ignore the party to study his newly acquired item. A sneaky player might even attempt to take the rest of his relics, though if they're caught, Bjunndof will attack and show no mercy, chasing them throughout the caverns until they forfeit all of their items or die. If the players encounter Bjunndof while already in possession of the broom, he'll demand they relinquish the item. If they refuse, he attacks. Players can exit the chasm by scaling the crevasse in L4, using the climbing gear in L5, backtracking through the gorge hopper holes in L6, or using any of the magic spells, scrolls, or items they found throughout the dungeon, such as the potions from the poachers or Ruth's Broom of Flying. Once the players exit Kraggarum, the adventure's officially ended, though your group can continue to play. Maybe you have them return to the dwarven city of Dolgrid to meet with Orfather Sturgis himself and collect their payment, and the players may need to recount their delve into the chasm to convince the king. Alternatively, if the party knows the truth about the ruins, they may tell the Orfather, who might request the players help him fabricate a connection to Kraggarum, which will fool his subjects in exchange for a reward. And with that, we just reviewed the entire Chasm of Kraggarum. If you're an upcoming player in Kraggarum and decided to heed my warning and skip that last part, good for you. If you didn't, I'm very disappointed. Now you gotta stay after class and write "I will not spoil a Therenor dungeon" 100 times on the whiteboard. All that's left to do now is answer that one final burning question. How did our 5 groups fare in the Chasm of Kraggarum? In total, we have 5 parties with 3 to 6 players and 5 dungeon masters who ran the exact same module. Let's take a look and see what they got into. Table 1 is DM'd by Rick, his party consisting of a noble genie paladin rogue multi-class named Bada Dunstan, ancestral barbarian Ekrin Dadar, lore bard Chad Kroger, and battlemaster fighter Jimmy Bucket. Our story begins with 4 determined souls, chasing dreams of riches and glory beyond the mountains and through the snow of Therenor's frigid north. After weeks of travel, they finally arrived at their destination, the Chasm of Kraggarum. Exhausted and nearly blinded by the winds, Table 1 decides the best course of action is to warm up in the tents, towards the chasm's center before their descent. While preparing for the next stage of their adventure, they notice the camp owner's lockboxes, picking them for their contents. Inside, they find the poacher's contract for frost giant parts, signed by Lawnray Pikearm. Good to know, but the main haul for today are dwarven artifacts. The party used the abandoned climbing gear to descend into Kraggarum, landing in the mountain goblin cavern, quickly coming face to face with 4 rowdy mountain goblins boasting about their strength. They demanded that the party choose one of them to be crowned the strongest, based on the cracks they made in the ice wall with their bony headplates. Chad and Jimmy inspected them for a minute, responding that they seemed to be evenly matched, which sent the goblins into a frenzy. Quickly, Bada chipped away at one of the cracks within the wall while they were distracted, and the party crowned that goblin, Yubak, the winner. The party turned to the large cavern north, suspecting the vile ruins to be the work of a hag. Entering the ruins of Kraggarum, they discovered it's been picked clean. The tavern, however, seemed to be occupied. The party observed the snowmen out front, melting one and tearing at the other with their weapons before losing interest. They then managed to pick the lock to the tavern. As they went to descend to the cellar, they spotted the Hag of Kraggarum, Rotten Ruth Rhymebone, butchering a seal in the basement. Bada apologized, shutting the cellar door behind him. After a few moments of discussing, they reopen it to find the hag inches from their faces. Rhymebone was rightfully upset, overhearing how the party was planning on dealing with her, and suggested that they make it up to her by bringing her Lawnray, one of the poachers. The party was not interested in condemning a stranger to death, and decided to instead attack her. Bada flanked the hag as she blasted Jimmy, Ekrin, and Chad with a devastating cone of cold. Ruth's snow mulacrums came to life, shuffling into the building as she climbed aboard her broom to fly off. When she dashed towards the chimney, the party made their opportunity attacks, with Ekrin's axe striking Ruth in the back. His free hand grabbed her broom, holding the hag in place while the rest of the party hacked her to pieces. Bada delivered the final blow, crushing her beneath the earth with a deadly channel divinity and smite attack. Then, Table 1 turned to the snow mulacrums and made quick work of them. After resting for a moment, they collected the hag's broom of flying, but were soon discovered by the frost giant roaming the cavern, calling for those hiding to reveal themselves. The party didn't at first, but Bjunndof, however, had all the time in the world, sitting in the snow in front of the tavern, waiting. Cautiously, Table 1 came out of hiding to discuss this matter with the giant, stating their reasoning for being in Kraggarum was simply to appreciate artifacts and learn more about them. Hearing they were fellow historians, Bjunndof welcomed the party and invited them to view his collection in his study. The players kept their distance from the frost giant as they discussed Sturgis Amberguard, who, as it turns out, has no connection to Kraggarum. Chad unknowingly took a step too close, and the unmistakable smell of magic caught Bjunndof's attention. It wasn't just any magic. It was one he sensed many, many times before. Ruth's broom. Bellowing, he demanded Chad hand it over so it could be added to his collection. Chad obliged, but this only satisfied the frost giant for the briefest of moments. Placing the broom on his highest shelf, he returned, demanding more magical items from their packs. Chad attempted to hide this with an illusion, but it was no use. A giant of his age knows the difference. As he became more and more irate, Bada struck first, starting combat. Bjunndof charged the elf, attacking him with a series of blows and knocking him unconscious. The giant's thunderous footsteps caused the broom to fall off of his shelf, right in front of Ekrin, who quickly tossed it to Jimmy. Ekrin knew what needed to be done. He told Jimmy and Chad they needed to leave, a slap across the face confirming how serious he was. Chad blocked the giant's path with a cloud of daggers as Jimmy mounted the broom, rushing the Bjunndof's horde and collecting as many of the artifacts as he could. Then he action surged, dashing twice in a row, flying out of the westward side of the cavern. The giant tried to chase, but the fierce Ekrin stood in his way. Bjunndof's full might rained down upon the barbarian, who stood just long enough for Jimmy to flee the caverns. As the giant chased after Jimmy, Chad was struck in the side. But this didn't matter, Ekrin needed tending to. Bada, who Chad stabilized earlier, headed south to the frozen cove, where he summoned his mighty paladin steed, a giant walrus. While Chad and Ekrin torched Bjunndof's study, the three then escaped through the cove, shattering the ice wall and swimming out to the open sea. Chad, Jimmy, Ekrin, and Bada regrouped. As they head back south towards the mountains, it dawned on them that they managed to outsmart a frost giant. But let's be honest, we wouldn't expect anything less from the bandits of Bjunndof. Table 2 is DM'd by Niefi, his party consisting of Orcus, a sea druid, Ornas Cryphorn, an evocation wizard, and Engabar Nomaset, a swashbuckler rogue. This group's adventure began by investigating the poacher's camp, restarting the fire in its center to warm up. Once toasty, they attempted to check out the cavern from above, gathering whatever gear they could find before deciding to bother the Svelgold. Orcus attempted to speak with the birds, though he was ignored because they had no food to offer. Moving north, they discovered the Gorge Hoppers, which Engabar blindly followed once they vanished beneath the snow. The party hurriedly chased behind him into the chasm and were spat out into the frigid corridor. Table 3 continued deeper into the chasms, passing through the ominous stained walls and eerie hanging talismans and reaching the ruins of Kraggarum. The players failed to unlock the front door, deciding to have Ornas use the spell Knock, the blaring sound of the spell echoing throughout the chasm. As the door creaked open, Table 2 stepped inside and met with Ruth Rhinebone, the Hag of Kraggarum, who joked about their attempt at breaking and entering. One of the players accepted the hag's meal, and after a brief moment of flirting between Orcus and Ruth, she proposed Table 2 retrieves Lawnray for her. The group, however, was uninterested, but soon the hag's pleas turned to demands as the door magically slammed shut. Still, the party remained unconvinced, exiting the tavern. Once they stepped outside, the three snowmen animated into Snowmulacrum and attacked, successfully grappling Orcus the druid. As one of the Snowmulacrum was slain, Ruth re-emerged from the roof on her broom. An intense encounter ensued, which left both the hag and the party on the edge of death. Ornas the wizard was downed but was brought back, and Orcus was unconscious and on his final saving throw. The hag snatched up the druid, threatening to kill him unless they submitted to her demand: bring her those poachers. Ornas and Engabar agreed to save their druid companion. Ruth branded Orcus with a curse, his life now in her hands, and she provided the adventurers with healing potions which allowed her to spy on them in the chasm once they drank it. After making note of Bjunndof's study, Table 2 made their way backwards through the caverns, nearly getting noticed by the lumbering Bjunndof as he roamed the chasm. Eventually, the party found the poachers' camp and approached, non-threateningly. Despite their deceptive attempts to get the hunting party to follow them, the poachers were overcome with fear. Instead, they implored the adventuring party help free their captured friend. The group was able to stealthily unlock the cage holding Tycho, the captured poacher, and narrowly escape the Iceborne's watchful eyes. Now emboldened, the poachers decided to finally follow the party to the Hag's Tavern, under the impression that they would be camping there tonight before facing the Frost Giant. As the poachers entered the Tavern of Kraggarum, the entrance slammed shut behind them. Ornas cast Arcane Lock, the poachers now banging against the magically sealed door to be let out. As their screams echoed throughout the cavern, the door would eventually open, revealing 4 frozen corpses and a smiling hag. Orcus's curse was then lifted, and Table 2 asked the hag about Amberguard's connection to the cavern. Ruth made a snide comment about the lost history of this place, before offering the party their reward, the fabled antique of Kraggarum, a rusty mailbox. With their single artifact in hand, they made their way back to the entrance in which they came, the druid shape-shifting into a spider to climb the cave wall and drop a rope down for the others. Table 3 is DM'd by Physis, his party consisting of Battle Rager Barbarian Monk Multiclass Ragnith Rags Arnold, Inquisitive Rogue Cess, Champion Fighter Hildra, and the Forest Druid Varian. Their story begins the same as our others, adventurers looking to strike big with fortune. The table's first interests lie with the Svelgulls, as they discuss the best way to descend into Kraggarum. The rumbling of ice echoes from beneath their feet. Suddenly, the crevasse engulfed our players, entering them into a freefall. Thinking quickly, Ragnith dug his hand axes into the wall of the crevasse, and Varian summoned grasping vines with the spell Entangle to catch their slab of ice and slow their descent. The violent change in terrain deposited the table into the mountain goblin cave, where they very loudly made themselves known to the goblins who lived there. Unlike Group 1, Table 3 decided to impart some words of wisdom upon their hosts. It's not the size of the crack, but how deep it goes. With this newfound knowledge, Ubok was chosen from the 4, and the party soldiered on. As they traversed the caves, they encountered the poachers. Lawnray's crew was found scavenging parts of already deceased giants. Not only a more ethical practice, but a safer one. Though their attempts to harvest the frost giant corpse in the 8th cavern led to one of their members, Tycho Wonderswitch, being captured. Seeing their plight, our adventurers decided to help, preparing for the worst. To their surprise, the Iceborne were a very logical and understanding people. Ensuring the constructs they had no desire for violence, the party explained their predicament and their search for Wonderswitch. the Iceborn were willing to part with the gnome, on the condition that they were to take him and leave immediately. Table 3 agreed and reunited Tycho with his peers. The party continued their voyage throughout the chasm, coming face to face with Bjunndof, the giant of Kraggarum. Cautious of outsiders, he immediately charged our adventurers, who attempted to flee but to no avail. The giant was simply too fast. Cornered and fearing for their life, someone among the party asked Bjunndof to trade for one of his dwarven relics, a question which pulled him from his territorial mindset. There's nothing the party has that Bjunndof is interested in trading for. However, he does mention the fallen frost giant in the southern cavern. Bjunndof has bested this intruder, who retreated and perished later on. Unfortunately, the giant already claimed his victory relic from their battle. So while the rest of the giant's horde sits just a few chambers over, Bjunndof is honor-bound to leave it be. He could slay the Iceborn which guard the corpse, though there is no honor in slaying the same foe multiple times over. Bjunndof proposed a solution. If the party beat the Iceborn in honorable single combat, he would be willing to trade their loot for a relic from his personal hoard. Not the fairest of deals, but it certainly beats being ripped to pieces by a raging frost giant. The table accepted, Bjunndof binding Varian to the chasm with a magic item so he may not fly off before their deal is done, and the table head for battle. The party reapproached the fallen giant cave. Primed for combat, they engaged with the constructs who fiercely defended the horde of their fallen giant. During the hectic battle, however, a grave error was made. A wide swing of an axe, a bolt of fire, or a stray arrow maybe, but when the dust cleared, poor Ubok lay slain among the shards of Iceborn. Devastated, the party returned to Bjunndof, who was pleased with their performance. As promised, the trade was made, and a personal piece from Bjunndof's collection was gifted to the party. The players asked Bjunndof for info on the relic, so they could relay it back to the king of the dwarves. As Bjunndof began to explain, it quickly became apparent that Ambergard's lineage did not descend from Kraggarum. One final parting request the party made was to trade once more for an item to help their dear friend Ubok. Bjunndof, rummaging through his stash, offered a wand of revivify, bringing the now traumatized goblin back from the grave. Bidding Bjunndof farewell, the players ascended from Kraggarum. What do they do next? Who knows? Table 4 is DM'd by Intergalactic Sasquatch, his party consisting of Zarius, a thief rogue, Ginkgo McShinko, a wild magic sorcerer, Shezkoa, a beast barbarian, Gerbok, a land druid, and Tuvau Kinterfield, a lore bard. Table 4 began their adventure in a similar fashion to the rest of the groups. They quickly investigated the poacher's camp before descending into the mountain goblin cave. There, the group met the quartet of squabbling goblins. Instead of investigating the crack, or making an attempt to modify the results, Gerbok convinced the goblin companions to partake in a new competition. Steadying his warhammer with the support of Shezkoa, each goblin took their turn charging headfirst into the druid's weapon. Goblins 1 and 4 fell backwards, while Goblin 2 simply went unconscious. Goblin 3, on the other hand, had but forcefully enough to shove Gerbok and Shezkoa backwards. Feeling prideful, Ubok, the victorious goblin, offered to guide Table 4 through the caverns as a show of thanks. The party followed their guide to the Gorge Hopper dens, where they investigated the ruins. One player noticed the giant's corpse through a crack in the wall framed by a window within the ruins. As they searched for a way to the room, the players encountered the poachers, who pleaded with them to retrieve their friend. Table 4 agreed, entering the fallen giant cavern and making themselves known. Gerbok spoke to the constructs in Giant, asking for the gnome to be released. The Iceborn, born to do whatever it takes to protect and expand their horde, agreed, but under the condition that the party establishes a trade route to the cavern once they get south of the mountains, allowing the Iceborn to expand their horde without ever leaving its side. With Tycho rescued, the players returned north, Ubok informing the players of the cave goblins which prowl in the chasm. Soon they stumbled upon the ominous runes heading towards Kraggarum's ruins. They sent Shezkoa to investigate, who crawled along the walls of the cavern and ensured there were no hidden tricks. When the coast was deemed clear, the party decided to knock upon the tavern door. The hag answered and invited them in. After a brief interview and discussion regarding the frost giant, Ruth made some food and asked the players to bring Lonray to the tavern, both of which they declined. As they left, the snow mulacrum animated and attacked. As the party fought them off, the hag flew out of the chimney, cackling maniacally. The snowmen were nothing compared to Ginkgo's flaming sphere and Zarius, magically enlarged by Tuvau. Shezkoa climbed the roof of the tavern, hurling a javelin at the hag just as Gerbak cast Thunderwave, shards of ice raining from the ceiling along with the hag hurling to the ground. A firebolt from Ginkgo dealt devastating damage, and a string of insulting words from Tuvau left the hag disoriented. Ruth, attempting to claw back at the barbarian and druid, failed miserably. Seeing there's no use in fighting, she attempted to flee, but Shezkoa bear-hugged the poor hag, as Zarius landed the killing blow, a slash across the throat. With the hag slain, the tavern was free to loot, and this is where this particular party left off, though I've been told they plan on picking it up again soon. Table 5 is DM'd by me, KrazyK, and our party consists of Anastasia Sunscorcher, a swashbuckler rogue, Pargnor Fargnor Bimnik III, a draconic sorcerer land druid multiclass, Grungle Stan, a drunken master monk, Glorious Saturn, a devotion paladin, Yara Sikafi, a forge cleric, and Asset 4, an inquisitive rogue. Table 5 started on the outskirts of the chasm, taking in the vastness of the crevasse. First, they observed the Svelgulls, noticed tiny, shiny glinting within their nests, spending some time searching them for gold and a silver key. The party then investigated the tents, picking the locks and finding contracts. They recovered the corpses dangling off the crevasse cliff, and decided to hold on to them to use them as bait. Made sure to loot the potions and the book off of them before descending into L5 using the climbing gear. Our party met up with the mountain goblins. Pargnor discovered all the cracks were identical, and chose a strongest goblin based off of their appearances. Yubak, the goblin they chose, offered to bring them to some place with shinies as payment, and they set off. The party traveled to L6. Asset 4 and Anastasia noticed the cave goblins on the ceiling readying their spears. The players called them out for their ambush, which the goblins denied, of course, saying that if they were going to ambush them, why would they tell them about the traps leading to L11 and the weird noises they were hearing in L10? The party thanked them for their info and moved on to L10. Pargnor decided to loot one of the graves in the cemetery, activating the ghosts. They wail, causing Grungle Stan, who's already 53 at this point, and Glorious Saturn to wither and age an additional 10 years. Anastasia gets possessed and attacks the party. Yaris uses her turn undead, and all three ghosts become frightened, ending the possession and fleeing as far away from her as they can. The party makes a break to L9, the Frozen Cove, where Yubak reveals the shinies, which are just the reflective pillars of ice that are found around this room. Asset 4 once again notices another presence in the room, 3 shadowy figures swimming behind the ice on the far right side of the wall. As he tries to inform the others, Bjunndof enters. The party throws the corpses into the center of the room, hoping to distract the giant. Bjunndof examines the corpses, sorrowfully. However, once he notices they're poachers, he simply rips them in two, their blood splashing against the ice. Bjunndof returns to his study and the rest of the party moves to L7, the poacher camp. They ambush Lonray, Grungle Stan announcing to the poachers that they're surrounded. They offer their items to the party and beg them for help with their friend Tycho, which the party agrees to do so. Pargnor and Glorious Saturn decide to move back up to L9, the Frozen Cove, to keep an eye out and potentially distract Bjunndof while the rest of the party works to free Tycho. Anastasia and 4 attempt but fail to pick the lock on the cage, leading to the discovery by the Iceborne. The party convinces them that Tycho is not magic, it's simply his eye. So they do what any logical construct would do and rip it out of his head, maiming him in the process. At the same time, Pargnor re-encounters Bjunndof, managing to convince him that he's not in here to steal, he just wants to learn about dwarven history. Bjunndof is highly intrigued and insists that Pargnor comes with him to his study to learn more, grabbing him and heading back to L12. Saturn sprints back to the poacher's camp to inform the party that Pargnor was taken. Pargnor and Bjunndof share a surprisingly intimate moment, Bjunndof confiding in him that he has enjoyed being able to share his passions with one another. Pargnor makes a move on Bjunndof, but gets curved hard. Bjunndof then tells Pargnor about the Hag of Kraggarum, and how he'd give anything from his hoard to get her broom of flying. Pargnor mentions him and his party can go and retrieve the broom for him, but the revelation that Pargnor was not alone sets Bjunndof off, calling him a vile deceiver who spouts nothing but falsehoods. The raging giant demands Pargnor reveal the rest of his party, and he calms down once they do. Bjunndof then departs back to his studies, and the players go to the Hag's Tavern, disabling the traps the cave goblins pointed at along the way. Grungle, Anastasia, and Four sneak inside, all three of them somehow managing to fail their stealth checks by a huge amount. Once Ruth reveals herself, Yaris takes advantage and attacks her from behind. After a round of combat, Ruth's Cone of Cold deals a devastating blow to both Pargnor and Saturn, downing the first, before Snow Mulacrum slams Saturn down next. Spirit Guardian and Spirit Weapon from Yaris make light work of the Snow Mulacrum, while Anastasia and Four pelt Ruth upon her broom with sneak attacks. Grungle, Stan, and Yaris mop up the remaining Snow Mulacrums. A trip attack from Four throws the Hag off her broom and onto the roof. Anastasia climbs up, finishing the Hag off with a vicious sneak attack. The party returns the room to Bjunndof, who takes it eagerly and begins to study it. While he's distracted, the party collects their relics as a reward and leaves the study. They return to L5 and drop Ubok back off before ascending the way they came. The moment they climb out of the crevasse, Grunglestan fades away to dust, because Grungle only lived to 50 and now he's 63. This video was a long one. It's the longest we've ever done, but I had an incredible amount of fun working on it. This was an insane amount of work, not just for me, but also for Lee, who drew every single thing in this freaking dungeon. Unbelievable work, she's so awesome. If you like this and you want to see more like it, please join our Discord, join our free Patreon. I want to hear from you guys about what you're interested in seeing in Therenor. These are the best ways I could get audience opinion. I'd like to apologize if this last bit seems a little more low energy. It's because it is. I think I've slept maybe 7.5 hours in the last 4 days. So now that that's done, I'm going to bed. So when I wake up, I better see a good morning from some new faces in the Discord server. If you stayed until the last minute of this hour-long video, let me know by saying good morning in a comment. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching. We will be back soon with some new Giantkin stuff. Have a good one.